thought we would go over the slides. Let's go over these questions and go over the slides a little bit as we go. And then I will walk you through angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, that section. So we can really look at the details there. So I took the approach of marking PHS 205 in all of Dr. Selvage's slides, so you can see that I really do focus on a narrow range of chemistry kind of details. So I think I'm going to ramp up the challenge a little in this section. I think we had a pretty, everybody did just fine in the last exam. So for our first kind of chemistry review, looking forward to Thursday, I've assigned that reading in the other textbook, Chapter 2, Functional Group Review. I know Dr. Mizuno went through functional groups, and in fact, I have what Dr. Hills mentioned to you in biochemistry. But this is a great section for it. We have a whole bunch of different categories of drugs that are all cardiovascular related. I think we could look at the details of their structure, and in certain cases we'll talk about the acidity and their reactivity. And that will extend into the next section as well. So doing this review, we'll do a team-based exercise on Thursday. I will then drop in a little bit more content. I think looking forward, again, kind of looking forward to next week on Tuesday. That pre-lecture quiz will probably will have the angiotensin converting enzyme topic that I'll cover today. That'll be on a week from now, pre-lecture quiz, plus if there's additional material from the next set of cardiovascular slides. I'll be very specific as to what you need. We're essentially in this section of the class. We're going to talk about, we'll have two major slide sets that are hypertension related, and then I go into a little bit of, I talk about adrenergics again are going to come up. And we then talk about thrombolytics and blood thinning types of medications. We're going to touch on those because Dr. Selvage, again, is all lining up with Dr. Selvage. And then we'll see how far we get. There's other sections as well. I'm just generalizing. And then once going into the only cardiovascular section we will not cover at the end of this part 2 will be the cholesterol drugs, the statins, which we're going to start section 3 with. Statins are really cool, and they're kind of a very widely used drug, so we are going to kind of look at them in a detailed fashion. Obviously, they're heavily prescribed, or just in terms of sheer numbers of prescriptions in the United States, so you guys should all know about statins very well. So let's walk through the slides. Is there any questions before we start on anything I'm missing? The test scores, like I said, all look absolutely fine. I haven't posted them yet. I had a couple makeup exams that I have to grade by hand, so I just wanted to look everything over before I made them all available. I doubt anybody will be really disappointed. Any other questions? Okay, great. I'm glad you're able to keep up in therapeutics. That's really nice to hear. I'm sorry, that's kind of been traumatic also. So this section, there are 7 learning objectives. You will find a lot of recall and describe words at the beginning of these. And these are basically broken up into the sections in order. In this whole talk, we will, and some of these learning objectives are fairly narrow. If you look at the amount of content I have, unless I add to it in class here or for some other reason, it's pretty straightforward. What I'm looking at in terms of questions. We'll touch on the osmotic diuretics and their unique properties. Thiazides obviously are of kind of the most expanded section because there's some interesting structure-activity relationships. We will have to look at loop diuretics. There are certain structural features. They are acidic molecules, or at least some of them are. Loop diuretics are very heavily used, especially furosemide. So again, I have to touch on those, even though there's not a wealth of chemical information that I'm giving to you. We have potassium-sparing sodium channel inhibitors. We have potassium-sparing aldosterone antagonists that we touch on. So there are two types of potassium-sparing diuretics. One are steroid-based, the aldosterone antagonists, and ones are those potassium-sparing, the non-steroid ones. We touch on the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, although they're not really used internally as much as others now because of their the fact that acidosis can cause them to become ineffective. But we do, drugs that are heavily prescribed are the ACE inhibitors. So that will be, I'll walk you through my thoughts about the design of those inhibitors. I talk about three drugs, captopril, enalapril, and fosinapril. Those aren't the most heavily prescribed set. I don't think there's a top, I'm not sure if one of those is a top 200 medication. I think there are more effective drugs that are prescribed more. So, but these are actually very telling in terms of their structure and how they were developed. It's a very interesting story, and they're very similar ultimately to the ACE inhibitors that are being used. So we'll talk about diuretics first. I have these in therapeutic classes, just like in the learning objectives. I put the drugs in green that currently I found in top 200 medications. If there's any errors or additions, please let me know. I'd love to. For me, it's just simply looking at the latest top 200 list and looking through. I don't know if something comes on or off the list, I might not necessarily see it as quickly. Dr. Selvage will give you a detailed description of the nephron. How far has he got yet? Has he started this yet?
Nope.
No, because he did. Well, I guess that'll be tomorrow then. Maybe it should have been yesterday. I'm not sure.
Yep.
All right. So you will definitely learn about the nephron and all of the parts of the nephron as they relate to the drug function. There are specific areas of the nephron, of this whole structure, basically of kidney substructure, that you should know where the diuretic works. Diuretic action can occur in the proximal tubule, works more in the glomerulus. We have the distal convoluted tubule, the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle. There's the loop of Henle here. There's all kinds of connections to make, where the transporters are and where the drugs actually have effect. And I will just be, as far as the information that I like to make a connection to, in this case, it's just how is that drug working, what kind of transporter is it affecting. So I touched on that during this quiz a little bit. I asked one question. You do need to actually make that connection. I know that's a pharmacology question, but I'd like to, at least you would understand the activity of the drug is related to its interaction at a receptor. So what I'll be doing in this section is actually will be changing the structure like I did with the thiazides, and then making you think, or giving you the opportunity to think about what changes in structure will do to the function or the activity of the drug. So again, this is just what's in your Foy's MedChem textbook, but this is just another table that I created using I used this picture out of the book. But again, that's more Dan Selvage related. Any diuretic basically increase the rate of urine flow and sodium excretion. I think we all knew that. We want to prevent, we want to actually eliminate fluid buildup in the water, or increase the excretion of fluids from our bodies. Although each of these drugs works in a different manner, but the ultimate goal is that we get increase in urine flow and usually increase in sodium excretion. I think this is technically, this is something that we probably would need to know here because I do talk about the pharmacology of osmotic diuretics. So in this case, I put PHS 205, but I did mention something of importance here is that they are pharmacologically inert. So can anybody start to describe to me like what an osmotic difference is, like how these drugs are working? So we know these drugs aren't metabolized. Does anybody know what how osmotic potential works, like how osmosis might work? What does it rely on?
Solute concentration.
The concentration?
Solute.
Of solute. Right. That's a great general way to put it. It's when you have an area, say in your body or on one side of a membrane that has a large concentration of solute in it, that wants to draw more water into it. It wants to actually be more dilute. Okay? So if you're talking about a membrane and you have a high concentration of solute on one side and a low on the other, that high concentration side wants to draw water to it. So the other side of that membrane is going to have water drawn from it. And that's the potential we're talking about now. We're talking about with osmotic diuretics, these are not being metabolized, they're not affecting a transporter. This is a physical effect. These are simple medications, right? They're just sugars, essentially. We have a mannitol. We have a sorbitol derivative. Or you can use even simpler compounds like glycerin or urea. So what happens? We ingest these. You're administered these medications. They're filtered at the glomerulus, meaning they pass through. Is that right? It's something that Dan will talk about a little bit. Essentially, they're taking water with them. I mean, the best way to put that for these, they're being filtered through the glomerulus. They're not being reabsorbed. Because they're heading towards excretion, they're going to take a lot of water with them. So in a nutshell, as was said, you're just increasing the concentration of solute, and that's drawing water with it. It's a great general way to think of it. Now with Dr. Selvage, you might look at how the urine is being processed actually in those structures and where exactly that transfer of water is occurring between cells. But you are essentially just giving people something, giving the patient a non-metabolizable solute that they excrete, and it draws water with them. Okay? So these are inert substances. There's nothing to relate to in terms of liver enzymes, how much they're absorbed. They're pretty much water-soluble things that are passing through you. Okay. So thiazides. These diuretics are actually competing for a sodium chloride symporter, a transporter that takes both of those type of ions. It's concentrated in the distal convoluted tubule. This is exactly Dr. Selvage's slide. So when we're talking about the potency of these drugs, in general, it's like how well are they interacting with that symporter? How well are they affecting the transport of those ions? So the chloride, it's competing for the active site on that symporter. So they're competing for chloride binding. More sodium and chloride are therefore excreted, so that binding site doesn't hold on to the chloride ion as much. So we have thiazides and thiazide-like drugs. Hydrochlorothiazide is the most common. So the thiazides are all versions of these ring systems with slightly different substituents. I asked how this ring system is numbered. Why do we start at sulfur?
I had a question before.
Oh, sure. Back?
So back on the slide that talked about the SIM order, that was the answer to the question, right, for the quiz?
Essentially, yeah.
I thought that those slides aren't testable.
Well, I was just saying, I did mention it on here that as I was saying before, you have to make a connection. If we're talking about SAR, I need to know that you know what you're talking about. We're talking about activity at a particular enzyme or at a particular active site. So you do have to make that connection. Yes, this has PHS 205 on it. And I will not be asking a lot of those questions, but in order to understand how active something is, you have to kind of know what it's active against.
Okay.
So that's the connection between our two classes. Dr. Selvage will be asking this, but I mean, you need to make a connection if we're going to talk about structure-activity relationships. And that's why I mentioned it in that case. Yes?
Will you be able to tell us which ones we do actually need to know? Because I'm getting confused now that we're crossing some out and bringing some back in. I just need clarification.
That's what I want you to know there. I need to make that point. Yeah.
The slide with the isosorbide, that's
Yeah.
different from the isosorbide dinitrate. or
Yes.
citrate.
Yes.
There are different mechanisms.
Isosorbide dinitrate comes along later. That's actually an angina medication, or it's actually a combination medication that has some diuretic effect, and because it's a nitrate, we'll bring that up later actually, but it's a different drug. Okay, so backing up a little. Mechanism of action. I know that Dr. Selvage, I put PHS 205 in these slides, and I'm going to, perhaps I'll be a little bit less generous with how much 205s I'm putting on everywhere, because I don't want to start making distinctions every single class. But really, like I said, really for mechanism of action, you should understand which is which. That's how we categorize the molecules, and that's how we're going to be analyzing their actual activity. So in the cases of these where I'm just talking about specific chemical features, or I'm actually referring to a very specific thing in the learning objective, that wouldn't be covered. But if I'm talking about, if my learning objective is, let's see if it actually is covered here in my thiazide. Yeah. So describe structure-activity relationships of thiazide-diuretics, okay? So in order to actually describe that, you have to understand what it's active against. But if I say describe the chemical structure of potassium-sparing sodium channel inhibitors, this one, I'm just talking about the chemical structure in that case. Again, with angiotensin, so if we look down at our ACE inhibitors one here, we're talking about rational chemical designs. We'll look at SAR and receptor binding. So we have to understand what the receptor is and the binding that's going on. Is that pretty clear? I'll try to make it a little clearer. I realize this is I've kind of put a lot of pharmacology in here, but I do want to put it in context. You will see these things in Dan Selvage's class. So we use sulfur to number the ring first. Why? Anyone?
Highest priority.
Highest priority. Why does it have highest priority? What's that? Anyone? A hand. When we're numbering this ring system.
Does that do the highest molecular weight?
It's the highest molecular weight, that's right. So sulfur, we look just on this ring system here and we say, which one is the highest molecular weight? Sulfur. And then we move in the direction of the next highest molecular weight. If we moved in this direction here, we have a carbon. In this direction here, we have a nitrogen. So we number in the direction of the nitrogen, which has the higher molecular weight. So 1, 2, 3, 4. When you're going around a ring system, you continue around the outside. 5, 6, 7, 8. And these are the numbers we were using to talk about this and what substituents are on these ring systems. So a little room to work there. Let's move on here. Okay, so moving ahead. Just talking about this ring system, thiazide-diuretics are weakly acidic. So there is only one acidic proton on here. It's this hydrogen on the nitrogen at the 2 position. This 2 is actually a little confusing. That's just marking the position. It's not nitrogen 2 or anything, but I'll just fix this out for clarity. The electron withdrawing nature of the oxygen atoms on the sulfone group make it so that this hydrogen here actually has a pKa of 5 to 6, which is around maybe a little bit higher than a carboxylic acid. That's actually fairly acidic for a nitrogen on a ring system. And because of that, we can treat this with a little bit of base, and then we can get a sodium salt, which I mentioned is more soluble. Once you make a salt of that, it increases the water solubility a great deal. How's that sound? And then I did 2 slides on the SAR. All right, let's walk through this. So compounds with an electron withdrawing group at position 6, which is right here, are always necessary for diuretic activity. Almost always they're chloro or trifluoromethyl. If you note in our drugs, they're actually exclusively chloro, but trifluoromethyl derivatives will work. So that's necessary. The sulfonamide group at position 7 gives compounds with little or no diuretic activity. So if you actually replace this or remove this group, so this sulfonamide is necessary for any activity. And then I talk about saturation of the double bond at the 3-4 position. So there's position 3 and 4. We're going from a double bond. All that is adding an equivalent of hydrogen across that double bond to give us a single bond here. Dihydro, a 3-4 dihydro. If you can imagine, you're just laying a hydrogen atom across that, and both hydrogens are attaching. You're getting rid of the double bond. All of those dihydro derivatives are 10-fold more active than unsaturated forms. So that's why hydrochlorothiazide is the most common commonly seen medication, not chlorothiazide. And then in the next slide, I had actually, dwelled a little bit upon the electronegativity of those atoms at position 6, but it turns out it's really just chloro or trifluoromethyl that are tolerated there. Any group that increases, any other groups are I think, basically eliminate activity. And I could touch on that when we talk about the quiz a little. But I found some more interesting information here. So any group that increases lipid solubility increases the duration of action. This drug is actually water soluble because of that salt formation. So as we see in the last slide in this section of the other derivatives, there are like lipid alkyl and aero groups attached to it, and that increases the duration of action. Also, relating to what we just talked about here, if you put a methyl group here instead of the hydrogen, and that is on the nitrogen, so what you ended up with an N-methyl group. Increased diuretic action, decreased polarity. So just by taking and putting an N-methyl group there, you've actually eliminated a lot of the polarity because you can no longer form that salt. You no longer have an acidic proton there. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. You said that the diuretic, this particular diuretic is water soluble?
It can be.
Okay, so if it's water soluble and you increase its liquidity, how is it more active? Like, how is it
It's definitely, the activity is not directly related to the water solubility. So think about the acidity of that proton and that nitrogen. You can form a salt with it. So that helps with formulation issues. If you have hydrochlorothiazide and you haven't formed a salt with it, it will be partially soluble in water. But once you make that sodium salt, it's very soluble, and you can make like IV solutions of it effectively. If you add a methyl group to that, the drug still will be somewhat soluble. It may not be ideal for a intravenous use, but I'm sure you could still formulate it so it will get in. It's really just once it gets into your body.
So not too lipophilic, right?
Yeah. So once it gets into your body, the duration of the effect is longer because it's more lipophilic. It can absorb into your tissues more. Drugs that are more polar, again, I'm a little bit generalizing, but drugs that are more polar that you take, drugs that are already polar are already tagged for excretion. They're already, once something is water soluble or your body identifies it as such, it becomes easier to glucuronidate and sulfate and then excrete. So I think it's more dealing with that. The sodium salt thing is really just formulating the drug if you need to make an IV solution. The sodium salts of those kind of drugs work. Any other questions? Okay. So sulfone replacement at position 1 is tolerated. So there are 2 sulfonamides, but if we were to actually replace this part of the molecule here, which I'll point out in the next slide, that is tolerated. We still need the sulfonamide here at position 7. And we still need an electron withdrawing group at position 6. But ring B, I've put ring A and ring B here. Ring B is not necessary for activity either. So you can break open that ring and you'll see some activity. We actually, and then we can see that in these thiazide-like diuretics. So here's chlorothiazide. We have our required sulfonamide here and our required electron withdrawing group, which is present in all these molecules. A similar metolazone. This has no sulfone here, and in fact has a carbonyl ring. A carbonyl group, which is which is still has activity. So we can see we have a ring system of A and B, but we have replaced the sulfone. It still has activity. Here we've broken open the B ring, and we have replaced the sulfone for indipamide, also active. And then the same thing with chlorothalidone. So I mean, sum it up. I mean, the left-hand side of this molecule, as I've written it, you have to have that sulfonamide and electron withdrawing group. On the right side, it can tolerate a lot more changes. So all these drugs have been developed as modified versions of the original chloro and hydrochlorothiazide. Did I miss anything SAR-wise? So in the original version of the slides, like I said, I dwelled on the electron withdrawing group nature of those, and I was going to mess around with changing that. On your quiz, let's go back. I think I can just draw out what I wrote. Oops. Sorry. Let's go to H2. And then I had a methyl group here, right? And let's see. Was there anything else?
H has been modified.
H and then, oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a hydrochlorothiazide. Sorry for my messy drawing here. So this is compound A. Would it be active? Probably not. We have what is an electron withdrawing, electron donating group at position 6 here. And then I asked again, would B be active? Which I believe I had a primary amide out here. So no. In one case, we had an electron withdrawing group, and that was with A. In one case, we have no sulfonamide, which completely eliminates activity. Okay, so neither of those would be active. It's kind of questions I will try and be asking here. I'm going to use a little bit more kind of chemical structure looking at things. So, yeah, any questions about that? What else did I ask? What this importer was? What the transporter was?
So
Yes, ma'am.
is it okay if you said that it was less active because
Yeah,
of
it's
the
okay.
methyl instead of
Yeah.
not active?
Yeah, I mean, it's electron donating group. I mean, I'm willing to, I'll just look through. It's really just recognizing that it's not an electron withdrawing group,
Oh, good. Yeah. All right.
right? If it's
We got
not an
that.
electron withdrawing group, it could also be less active. It might not completely lose activity. It says that it does, but as long as you're describing it to be in an essay, if you said this is an electron donating group, and I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure it'll have no activity, but at the very least it'll have less activity. Something like that. And then for question part B, it would be for compound B, it was the sulfonamide has been replaced, and that's essential for activity, so it has no activity. Those are the shortest possible answers, although I heard a lot of typing from some people, so I guess I'll get true essay responses from some. And that's okay. Alright, well enough on these. Let's see here. Okay, adverse effects, definitely not going to talk about those. Loop diuretics also act on a symporter, which is a co-transporter. They're called loop diuretics because they affect the loop of Henle. These drugs have some variation in chemical structure. That's kind of like the most obvious statement in the world, and that annoys me, so I'm going to cross that out. Furosemide was one of the earliest discovered drugs. Anthranilic acid is orthoaminobenzoic acid. common name for that chemical structure. Anthranoic acid is common in a lot of, that substructure is used for a lot of like natural product synthesis. It's kind of a common chemical structure. It's mass produced and it's used in a lot of different chemical reactions. So it's a derivative of that. We have that ortho relationship of the amine and the carboxylic acid right here. That's O. And the molecule, the acidic part of this molecule is that functional group that is the carboxylic acid. Did everybody get that? Pretty straightforward. What's the acidic functional group? The carboxylic acid. So this gives it a pKa of around 3 or 4. In this case, they say 3.9. That is a stronger acid. It's a lower pKa than our thiazides, which have that interesting other proton on the nitrogen that can be as acidic. So then I was like, point out functional groups. So this is just a way to touch on what we're talking about on Thursday. So what is a functional group? First of all, let's back it up. Can somebody tell me, just in one sentence? Need volunteers. Who are volunteers? Who am I going to call on? What is a functional group? She clams off. What is it?
It's part of the structure that makes it function.
Part of the structure that makes it function. It's even less than that. It's just part of the structure, right? It's not. It might not. I mean, I guess technically it affects the function of the drug, but it really is a functional group. Is just any part of the molecule. It's just a way for us to talk about a part of the molecule. It doesn't have to be something that's hanging off an arrow ring. It can be any way. It can be anything. We can define it in any possible way. It can be a single carbon atom. All right. So kind of a race for now. When we're talking about functional groups, there are lists of things that you see. You see them in biochemistry. You've seen them in chemistry. Yeah, you should become a little familiar with those, but think of it also as like they're not all acidic. They're not all, they're not all water soluble. They're not all anything. They can be a single carbon atom. So what do we have in furosemide? We have, let me just erase this. I'm trying to figure out how this eraser works and I keep on erasing it. Okay, so what do we have here? Sulfonamide.
Furan ring.
A furan ring. Furosemide. Look at that. There's a furan ring right there. So we've identified a sulfonamide. Okay, what else?
Carboxylic acid.
Yep. Carboxylic acid. Halogen. There's our chlorine there.
Secondary amine.
Secondary amine. Where is that?
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. Secondary has 2 things attached to it. Okay. Phenyl ring. Is that all? There's nothing else? What's another unit? What's the only thing we haven't circled?
Carbon.
Carbon. What kind of carbon is that? Alkane. Closer. What's a name for that CH2 unit that binds things together? No? Methylene?
Yeah, of course.
Methylene. There's 2 hydrogens on a carbon, and they're connected to something. Methylene. I'll write it here better. I think that methylene unit is kind of getting the point of what I'm talking about. It is a single carbon. It is in the molecule, and it's connecting some things. You have to have some way of talking about that carbon. You can say that carbon with 2 hydrogens on it. You say, no, this methylene unit. That methylene unit is a functional group. I know it doesn't have like an acidity. It doesn't have any. Yeah.
Wouldn't the
phenyl ring kind of like sum that up because it's included in that functional ring?
The phenyl ring. This is the phenyl ring right here. Right, with the X in it.
Where's the
The methylene is right here.
Oh,
Connected to the furan ring. The arrow right there. It's connecting that secondary amine to that furan ring. That's what I'm saying. Like a simple carbon, if that was a, since it's a carbon connected to two things, it's a CH2, it's a methylene unit. That's something that you want to point out too. You could even call this functional group. You can break it down or actually include two functional groups. I wonder if I have a different color pen here. But what about all this part of the molecule here? That's a benzoic acid, right? That ring attached to that carboxylic acid, you could say, oh, that's a benzoic acid there. If you're referring to that part of the molecule, you could call this a benzoic acid derivative. That's also a functional group. Yes?
ether?
An ether linkage, an ether like an oxygen between the two. An ether is not in this molecule.
How about on the furan?
On the furan. Oh, that is very good. Oops, I'm writing with a highlighter here. Sorry. See? Now that's what I'm talking about. See, we call this a furan ring, right? But we have some groups in here. That oxygen is an ether. It's an oxygen connected to two carbon groups. Here we have a unsaturation, unsaturated CC bond, double bond. What do you want to call it? Yeah, so that ether, that's a great way to look at it. You can break it down any way you want. So it's not just simply, I guess I want you to look beyond exactly just what's connected to that phenyl ring there. The phenyl ring itself is a functional group. Okay? That's the generality, that's the approach that's taken in chapter 2 that I asked you guys to read. Okay? I think he starts out the chapter, or he or she, I don't know which author wrote it, comparing the parts of a refrigerator to the parts of a car, and which parts of the molecule are important. So we're going to talk about functional groups. We're also going to talk about what effects they have on the physical properties of the molecule. That's really the connection we need to make. On a certain drug molecule, a methyl group can be the difference between 1,000-fold active, more active than the other non-methyl containing group. But on certain drugs, that methyl group has very little difference whatsoever. He relates it to the wheels on a refrigerator versus the wheels on a car. In order for a car to work properly, you need the wheels on it. In order for a refrigerator to work properly, you probably don't need the wheels on it, except when you're cleaning under it for a couple of years, but that doesn't really, it's not really the purpose of the refrigerator. So we are not going to focus on the amino acid side chains, and I pointed that out also, but certainly read a majority of it, the text, read the pages that I talked about, and look at the questions at the end of the chapter. Okay, so did I have, Stephanie, did I have a typo here?
No,
That I did not reply to the whole
didn't
class?
realize it said excluded on the second slide. I thought it said example, but it said excluded. On the following slide.
Okay.
I didn't know if you were saying that it did have toxicity on one and you didn't have on the other, but it was saying excluded on the next slide.
Oh, the following
Yeah.
slide. Sorry, not this slide.
Because it says, I thought it said example, but it says excluded.
And I should, ototoxicity, except, except is what I meant.
Yeah, so I was like, okay.
So not torsimide. So that is the damage to hearing is a side effect, right? Ototox. Does anybody know if that's reversible or not? I don't know if it's a permanent effect. Does anybody know about their loop diuretics? Loop diuretics, a little side story, loop diuretics are used in horse racing a lot as not necessarily performance enhancing drugs. Does anybody own horses or know anything about horses? Okay, not a lot. There's horses' cardiovascular systems are very powerful, and when they really exert themselves, they can actually burst blood vessels in their lungs and up through their throat, and they can bleed because they're exerting themselves. So it's called being a bleeder. And if a horse is designated as a bleeder, then after 2 races, then they cannot race anymore. They're banned from racing. So it's kind of a interesting health conundrum. And it turns out that loop diuretics actually effectively prevent that from happening by lowering the blood pressure. Lowering their blood pressure on the vasculature that's in their lungs and their basically their whole breathing system, so it eliminates that possibility. So horse races, it's not like a performance enhancing drug. They are allowed to use them, but they have to stop using them a certain amount of time before the race. So loop diuretics in horses. So bubentonide, just to point out the differences here, there's a meta relationship here. So the substitution pattern on this ring is slightly different. It still has a primary sulfonamide here, still has a carboxylic acid. Torsemide, there's really no structural connection to make besides the sulfonamide, which is masked here in a whole other system. But just the fact that torsemide does not have that ototoxicity. It doesn't have the acidity of either of those molecules. And I don't think that's a direct relationship. I don't think the acidity is related to their ototoxicity. But okay. So with the potassium-sparing diuretics, there are 2 classes, the sodium channel inhibitors. The triamterine and amiloride are kind of are structurally related in that they have the same basic connectivity of atoms. I wrote over here pyrazine just so I would remember to write out the structure of what a pyrazine ring is. I believe that's what we're talking about here. Is that right? The structure is in amiloride, and amiloride is basically an open form. If we were to actually I'll just write similar connectivity. If we were actually just to connect out here in a simplified form. So I specifically drew them so that you can see that these are related. We're forming a ring here at B. So the A rings are very similar. And triamterine is just it's almost as if they're just condensing amiloride. And it's not a direct chemical transformation that's occurring. They're not making triamterine from amiloride. But I just wanted you to note the structural similarities. They both have a pyrazine ring in them. That would be A. The left side of that ring, they both have an amino group on them. So this group here is the same as here. Here we have an electron withdrawing group. Here we have a phenyl ring. But that's all really the similar, it's the only what I really wanted to point out. So they're very structurally similar. I think amiloride, is it amiloride and triamterine that are used more? Does anybody know? Does anybody come across these?
Yeah, they're used, but not
Triamterine.
a lot.
They're what?
See triamterine with hydrochlorothiazide.
Oh yes, triamterine is with hydrochlorothiazide in some kind of product, right? Yeah, okay. That's where I remember seeing it, right? Yeah, that's actually something that you'll definitely get an impression with when you get into this cardiovascular stuff, and it's a variety of your therapeutics professors. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of combinations to consider. Especially with, that's why we're using a potassium-sparing diuretic. It has a particular purpose. So it will be in combination. Okay, so that's all there is about this. Okay. And as far as the mineralocorticoids, in the past I actually delved a little bit deeply into the steroid structures. There's a lot of historical context, but that's something I assume Dr. Mazzino did to some extent. Did you talk about steroids? I assume that was part of it, yeah. I don't remember exactly in what context. But the natural agonists, we're talking about aldosterone receptors, or an aldosteroid is a mineralocorticoid. Our natural agonists would be aldosterone, and you can see that spironolactone and plenarone are structurally related. Meaning they are steroids, meaning they have that typical 6-6-5 4-ring structure that goes up and to the right. The main structural, the key structural feature of this is this actually defined in this name, spironolactone. So this is a spiro fusion, and I wrote this at the bottom of the slide, and it's a lactone. So what is a lactone? What kind of functional group is a lactone? Ester? Who said that? Cyclic ester. Thank you very much. So it's an ester constrained into a 5-membered ring in this case. An ester and a lactone are both susceptible to aqueous hydrolysis. So there in fact are metabolic products where that ring is open. But it's just that spirofused lactone that gives it an effective antagonist properties. We have a natural agonist that's a very similar structurally, and we've made a few modifications, and now we have an antagonist. I think that's all I wanted to do about that. Straightforward question on the quiz. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Both of them have this thiazide ring system. So thia stands for sulfur, and diazole is 2 nitrogens containing. Diazole. So I asked what happens when the methyl group is attached there. We would get an increase in lipophilicity, and then it increases its penetration in the ocular fluid. Now this is kind of a, I don't know how much this is used outside of ocular preparations of methazolamide or ocular medication. I don't know actually how often these are used for hypertension as drugs in an IV dose because, as Dr. Selvage points out, with prolonged use, we get acidosis of the blood occurring, right? You get a very rapid rise in the amount of bicarbonate being excreted from your blood. When acidosis occurs, the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors lose their effectiveness. So they basically, once you dose them a certain amount, they lose potency. Well, I think I'm gonna leave it at that today. We have the ACE inhibitors. What I'm going to do, I think I'm just gonna do a pre-lecture quiz on that anyway. This stuff that's going to be next Tuesday. I will entertain any questions via email. I have the reading there that I can fill in some points, but you should walk through it. I have a lot of information on those slides. Well, I'll fill you in on what the deal is though, but I don't want to go for it today, getting towards the end of class. So I'll see you for our team-based learning. I'll give you some instructions via email today or tomorrow.